Guess what? We are about 2 weeks from training camp. The long desert almost over. And that means it's time to set the table for this 2023 season. Been talking a lot about the 49ers going all the way down to the 90th man on the roster over the course of this offseason. But I think that at some point, we have to zoom out and take a look at the landscape of the entire league and maybe be a little bit more specific than that right now. Maybe the landscape of the entire NFC, because the 49ers found themselves in the NFC title game last season. We all know how that ended up. Brock Purdy was hurt on the third offensive play for the 49ers way too early. And then they didn't really have a chance to win that game against the Eagles. So the Eagles won the NFC crown. The Eagles then went on to the Super Bowl where they lost to the Chiefs. And now we have to look at this 2023 season. And my question is, are the 49ers the best team in the NFC after this year's offseason maneuvering? It seemed that all of the teams at the top did some aggressive maneuvering. They all did it in slightly different ways. But now we get to handicap this 2023 season based on the work that was done in the offseason. And I look at this as a big four atop the NFC. And there's teams like Washington, the Commanders, who are solid as well, but aren't quite complete. I think that your most complete teams, though, lie with the 49ers, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Dallas Cowboys, and the Seattle Seahawks in the NFC West. They're rising, I would say. Last year, they played the 49ers in the playoffs. San Francisco handled them all three times, twice in the regular season, then in the postseason with relative ease. The postseason game was close there up until toward the end of the third quarter. But the Seahawks, they continue to infuse their roster with young talent. They've got good depth. They always play good special teams. It will all depend on the QB position if they can get a reprisal of last year from Geno Smith, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit because it does come down to QB for most of these teams. But the Seattle Seahawks are part of my big four in the NFC. Other teams could make some noise, like the Detroit Lions. It seemed that they ended last season on a run. It seems that they have continued to deliver on the ascent. But for me, I like the old guard combined with one newcomer, one upstart team, and that is the Seahawks. So I'm going to be looking at the 49ers, the Eagles, the Cowboys, and Seattle as true contenders here for the best team in the NFC. So let's just go through this team by team. The 49ers dispatched of the Dallas Cowboys last season. That came in the divisional round. That punched their ticket to the NFC Championship game. So let's take a look at DVOA from last year just so we can put some context on where the Cowboys performed relative to the 49ers and everybody else. DVOA, total DVOA on the season, 49ers were the best team in the NFC behind only the Bills. By the way, if you break this out into post-Christian McCaffrey acquisition, the 49ers were number one by a mile, by a lot, over every single NFC team. That's why this question right here is a fair one. Are the 49ers the best in the NFC? Well, because they were the best in the NFC from the period that they acquired Christian McCaffrey to the time that Brock Purdy got hurt last year. So you have to assume they're going to be healthier at the quarterback position than they were in the NFC Championship game. And that puts them in position to be one of the best teams in the NFC, possibly the best team. But anyway, Dallas, where were the Cowboys? They were number 6 last year overall DVOA. Number 2 defense. The offense wasn't quite as good last year. It was a down year for Dak Prescott. Number 15 offensively. But the Dallas Cowboys, they've added Stephon Gilmore, 32-year-old corner. He's not exactly a spring chicken, probably past his best years. But on the offensive side, they've added Brandon Cooks. And it's really interesting to me because Dak Prescott last year had a career year in the wrong way, a career year in, oh my gosh, he's throwing too many interceptions, threw 2 more against the 49ers. INT rate for Dak Prescott was like 2.9%, which is way, way worse than average. It was by far the worst of his career. This is a quarterback who, in his peak years, just not too long before the 2022 season, was well below league average as far as, better than league average in interception rate. So Dak Prescott, for some reason, was having trouble keeping the ball out of the other team's hands last year. And, a lot of people say, well, beyond CeeDee Lamb, who did he have? And I think he had some weapons. I think he also had Dalton Schultz, obviously. Tony Pollard coming out of the backfield. But as far as wideouts go, he's now added Brandon Cooks. And I spelled Brandon Cooks wrong up on the screen. I always feel bad when I spell a name wrong up there. Brandon Cooks is Brandin. Should have gotten that one. Maybe autocorrect got me. Brandon Cooks and Stephon Gilmore. To me, it's unbelievable that Brandon Cooks, who's been in the league since 2014, is still only 29 years old. It feels like he's been in the league much longer than that, but they might still be able to milk some real production out of him. The question is, does Brandon Cooks allow Dak Prescott to return to his old form in not turning the football over as much as last year? Because again, you look here, Dallas, I have them highlighted, number 2 defense last year, number 15 offense. If that offense gets better, and it might through this free agent acquisition, I don't know if the defense can get much better than number 2 because the 49ers, who were number 1 last year, have taken more steps defensively. We'll talk about that in a bit. But if the Cowboys offense gets better, this team can make some real noise. All right, moving on to the Philadelphia Eagles. We know who they lost because the 49ers picked them up. That's Javon Hargrave. And I've talked about Javon a lot over the course of the past week. He was the number 2 defensive tackle or defensive lineman in football, defensive player, period, I think, right? The number 2 player in defense, EPA plus minus, meaning that the Philadelphia Eagles, with him on the field versus without him on the field, there was a massive gap. It was the second biggest gap of any player in football. Derek Brown of Carolina was the only more impactful player by that metric than Javon Hargrave. So we know in a lot of ways, Javon Hargrave was the straw that stirred the drink for the Philadelphia Eagles. And now he's a 49er. That is a big shift. That's a big defection atop the NFC, and that might shift the balance of power atop the NFC. The Eagles also lost defensive back C.J. Gardner-Johnson. He's now with the Detroit Lions. We talk about the Lions being a rising stock. C.J. Gardner-Johnson is a player to watch. And then they lost their 2 top linebackers in T.J. Edwards and Kaiser White. So the Eagles have lost quite a bit from a defense that last season ranked number 6 in DVOA. The Eagles were tremendously balanced last season. Number 3 overall DVOA. That was number 3 offense and number 6 defense with a solid special teams unit. The offense, I mean, they're returning those weapons and they're returning a really good offensive line. The question is, can that defense, without Gardner-Johnson, without those 2 linebackers, and most importantly, without Javon Hargrave, who was such a difference maker as far as absorbing double teams, setting stuff up for some really productive edge rushers, Hassan Reddick, Josh Sweat on the edge, can that defense continue churning along at that top 6 level? And the Eagles, they drafted Jalen Carter out of Georgia, who, you know, might be the most controversial prospect in this draft, at least the most controversial first-round prospect, because people thought initially that Jalen Carter would go amongst the first couple picks. Then there was some off-field stuff that happened. Then it didn't seem that he was really in shape at his pro day. And, I mean, it was just it was total mess of a pre-draft process for Jalen Carter, to the point where he fell down to the Eagles. They're able to nab him a little bit later in the first round. And they're talking about him as a replacement for Javon Hargrave, who went to the 49ers at defensive tackle. Now, there are a couple different ways you could look at this. And it shocks me that so many people are talking about Jalen Carter as a surefire star that's going to replace Javon Hargrave right away for a couple of reasons. A, he's a rookie. And we know that rookies, especially in the trenches where you have to have a different level of strength to succeed at the NFL versus college, we know that rookies are going to struggle more often than not in their first year. So when you have the second most impactful defensive player based on EPA plus minus and Javon Hargrave leave your team, I don't think it's really realistic to think that Jalen Carter is going to replace him right away without the Eagles defense skipping him a beat as a rookie. I mean, it took Javon Hargrave years to develop the man strength and the presence that really benefited Philadelphia's defense on the interior last year. Reason number 2 is there are so many red flags with Jalen Carter. To assume that this guy is a slam dunk star at the NFL level, or even a slam dunk effective player at the NFL level, despite the fact that it looked like he might have been out of shape at his pro day. I mean, that's a big red flag, right? To me, that's a crazy leap in logic. So maybe Jalen Carter does end up producing at the NFL level, but there are some odds that he's going to have to overcome here. right? And there's a reason why he slid down to the Eagles in the draft, because he isn't a surefire contributor, especially immediately. But he represents a hinge point because the Eagles have lost this talent and they have lost Javon Hargrave to the 49ers. And defensive tackle made that Eagles pass rush sing last year. I mean, without Hargrave, I don't think they lead the NFL in sacks. Well, if they can replace Hargrave with Carter, they're going to continue clicking, and they might as well still be the NFC favorite, just like they were down the stretch run of last season. But that's a big if. That's a very tenuous hinge point for Philadelphia. So we'll keep our eyes on that one. All right, now to the third big challenger of the 49ers, the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks didn't do much via free agency as far as massive splashes. I mean, it's hard to make as big of a splash as the 49ers did with Javon Hargrave. But with the Seahawks, you've got Jackson Smith and Jigba, and you have Devin Witherspoon, the cornerback out of Illinois. So you got an Ohio State receiver, Illinois cornerback, two bona fide first-round talents on this Seattle team that weren't there last year. And you see the way that the Seahawks love to build under Pete Carroll constantly goes through the youth pipeline. So this is a team that's young. This is a team that's hungry. This is a team that was a rising stock last season, and they add a couple potential impact players. Now, same thing as Jalen Carter, though. If Jalen Carter was a hinge point for Philadelphia, these two guys might not be as big of hinge points for the Seahawks, but they're still going to be determinants of the trajectory that this team takes in all likelihood, right? If you can add Devin Witherspoon and a competent corner to what they're already getting from Tariq Woolen, well, all of a sudden you've got the second version of the Legion of Boom. Maybe not as good as Legion of Boom. I mean, those guys were all-timers a decade ago, but you could see what Pete Carroll is trying to build on the defensive end with some youngsters in that secondary. You can add a wideout to what you already have with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Well, then Geno Smith can continue making some noise in this 2023 season, and the Seahawks can continue ascending. The 49ers are no longer the new kids on the block in the NFC West, right? They used to have that young, up-and-coming roster that was really hungry. Well, they've been replaced by the Seahawks as the team that's freshly trying to make its imprint on the division. The 49ers are now the old veteran guard, and they're still more talented, and they have more star power than Seattle, but they've got to watch their backs, especially with some of these draft picks coming into the Pacific Northwest. Ultimately, though, I think this is going to be the question that determines so much of what happens next year. What version of Dak Prescott are the Cowboys going to get? What version of Jalen Hurts are the Eagles going to get? And what version of Geno Smith will the Seahawks see next year? Because let's be honest, Jalen Hurts was awesome last year. Are the Eagles going to get the same Jalen Hurts this year, post-contract signing? Maybe so. If they do, well, look out. Then I think what's really going to determine everything is that defensive side of the ball, if Jalen Carter can replace Javon Hargrave. But the other two QBs, more question marks in their performance last year than with Jalen Hurts. Dak Prescott, as I mentioned, threw a ton of interceptions. INT rate was way too high. I don't think the Cowboys are legit contenders unless Dak Prescott reverses course. And maybe Brandon Cooks allows him to reverse course. Maybe some other stuff happens that turns things into a positive direction, but Dak Prescott did not trend in the right direction to end the 2022 season. Then there's Geno Smith. And speaking of not trending in the right direction to end the season, Geno Smith can fall into that category. He was lighting the world on fire through about the first half of the 2022 season. And then the efficiency went back down to average or below average for the rest of the year. 49ers saw the worst version of Geno Smith when they clinched the division in Seattle. And then Geno Smith wasn't great when he faced them in the wild card round of the playoffs. If Geno does not deliver at first half of 2022 levels, the Seattle team is not going to be a threat to be the best in the NFC. So what version of each of these three quarterbacks shows up is going to play a huge factor in how the NFC goes down next year. And along those lines, it wouldn't be fair unless we also pointed out that what version of Brock Purdy, or you can insert whatever 49ers quarterback you want into the brackets. If we didn't say this mattered, then we'd be a little bit hypocritical, right? Brock Purdy also has a lot to prove next year as far as sustaining his 2022 trajectory, which allowed the 49ers to be where they were at that NFC Championship game before he got hurt. And it might be Trey Lance and it might be Sam Darnold. Obviously, injuries happen. 49ers know this better than anybody. But if we're talking about which way these three guys are going to go, we also have to talk about which way the 49ers quarterback position is going to go. Because I have to say this, outside of quarterback, I think the 49ers have the NFC's top roster. I think they had it again. I think they had it last year, so I think they have it again this season. The 49ers defense is only better. It was already number one in the league last year. Javon Hargrave makes them better. I do think that they're going to find a way to plug in some of the depth that they lost. You can trust Chris Kasarik on that one. You can trust the way that they built the roster on this one. Javon Hargrave should make everybody better. But on the offensive side of the ball, even though you have so many returners, even though you have so few questions outside of the main position, that main position of quarterback is going to go a really long way in casting a domino effect on the rest of the unit. So the 49ers might have that best roster outside of quarterback, but quarterback still is the biggest question mark for them of those top four NFC teams. It is the $1 million question that's going to determine whether or not the 49ers are the best team in NFC. All right, let's go to the questions. 49ers Q&A. What do you guys think? What's everybody's opinion on the 49ers standing within the top teams in the NFC? Now, maybe you have a dark horse. Maybe you like the Detroit Lions. Maybe you like somebody else, the Washington Commanders. But I think it's 49ers, Cowboys, Seahawks, and obviously the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm scrolling through some of these questions, see exactly where we are. If you want to take a look at the DVOA chart, have a pass at it. The DVOA chart is something that, I mean, obviously was based on last year's rosters, but gives us an idea of where each of these teams has to improve to make up ground. Now, Detroit last year, they're number 9 DVOA. They're better than Seattle, so maybe I should have made this a big 5 instead of just a big 4. Green Bay down at 12, but obviously no more Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. To find the next NFC team, you have to go down to Tampa Bay. No more Brady in Tampa Bay. So the NFC, rather top-heavy, right? Not a great conference in that solid depth portion. A lot of bad teams. The New York Giants, they just paid Daniel Jones. They're number 21. So anyway, let's open it up to some questions here. This is a good question. How do I see the loss of coordinators affecting Philly's chances? There has been a brain drain in Philadelphia. They have lost both their offensive and their defensive coordinator. If they've got a good system going, I don't think it really affects their chances all too much. But it's not easy to have a foolproof system that keeps on churning going. So let's see what Philadelphia does as far as performance in the coaching ranks this year, because the true test of a team, like a program, we'll put it that way. I can't call Philly a dynasty because they haven't won a Super Bowl with this installment of their team yet, but it's the true test of staying power comes through the ability to overcome loss of coaches, because the Niners have seen this, right? Whenever you see success, other teams are going to want to hire your coaches for promotions with them. Then you have to prove that you've got the system of up-and-comers that can go and fill those shoes. So that's a very good question, and we'll see how it affects Philadelphia. The 49ers have passed that test with flying colors, and now the Eagles face the same challenge. Mike says we got an Eagles fan on. Do we? That'd be cool if we did. 49ers are lead in the NFC, but what about against the top AFC teams? Well, Buffalo. Last time 49ers played Buffalo, they got worked, but that was in 2020. That was when the 49ers were starting Nick Mullins. That wasn't really a fair fight against Buffalo. Kansas City, it was a close game until 6 or 7 minutes left last year. That Chiefs game last season too, that was when a lot of 49ers were fresh off of injuries. I think Bosa played his worst game of the season. So it seemed that those two teams were evenly matched until the 49ers ran out of gas late, and probably not all too fair to use that as a tell-all barometer for how the 49ers stack up against the Chiefs. I mean, Kansas City's got the best quarterback in the game. That's all you have to say. They're always going to be contenders. They're always going to be the team that you've got to have that target on their back because they're the Chiefs, and they've won 2 Super Bowls here in recent years. Down to Cincinnati. Last time the 49ers played them, 2021, they went into Cincinnati and won in the postseason. So I think the 49ers match up well there. Baltimore, it's been since 2019 when the 49ers played them. Close game. Miami, 49ers took care of the Dolphins last year. Game actually didn't end up particularly close. 49ers defense overwhelmed the Dolphins. So I think, the very top of the AFC is really tough. You've got Buffalo, you've got Kansas City, you've had Cincinnati. The 49ers have beaten one of those 3 teams here in the past couple of years, and they haven't had a chance at Buffalo, and you have that game with a lot of asterisks last year against Kansas City. So if you could get through the NFC, and we saw Philadelphia and Kansas City go at it, that was a 15-round prize fight in the Super Bowl. If you get through the NFC, you've got a good shot to win the Super Bowl. I think the top of the NFC is comparable to the top of the AFC. It's just that the AFC is better when it comes to that secondary depth in the conference. 49ers throwback. Yes, offensive line is still a question mark. That is true. But the 49ers have done what they can to make it as small of a question mark as possible, right? You've got to get production from Spencer Burford at right guard. And he took some steps in the right direction last year. If you don't, then John Feliciano's a solid signing as a backstop there at right guard and at center. They re-signed Jake Brendel. Aaron Banks broke out last year. And then right tackle at that hinge point. Will Colton McKivitz deliver better pass protection than Mike McGlinchey? And if he does, will he be able to keep that run blocking on par or at least close to where Mike McGlinchey left it so that the 49ers offense can continue clicking? A lot on Colton McKivitz's shoulders. Cap hit of only $1.5 million. That should allow the 49ers to spend elsewhere, right? That should allow for financial efficiency across the board if Colton McKivitz delivers at right tackle. It's not really efficient if he sucks at right tackle, but they have a lot of belief in him. And ultimately, some developmental players, some guys that have been with the system for a few years. McKivitz has been around since 2020. Ultimately, you got to have some of those guys deliver so you can afford a high price roster elsewhere. This is a question for everybody watching, not for me. If you have to bet your entire life savings, who do you bet would go further in the playoffs, the 49ers or the Eagles? I don't think it'd be smart to bet on that because both of those teams are good and you're relying a lot on luck because injury chance, right, is going to determine a lot of how this plays out. Last year definitely had a massive factor in who went further, the 49ers or the Eagles. I'm not going to answer questions about possible cut candidates because we don't know who's going to get cut. Let's just, the NFL offseason is so active. So many twists and turns happen. We can go 1,000 different ways with hypotheticals. The 49ers are going to sit back, do their, pro scouting. They're going to be ready for guys like La'el Collins in case he does get cut. And if that does happen, then they're going to decide whether or not to make their move. But to talk about it on July 9th, before we even know which direction this is going to go in Cincinnati, it seems a little bit premature to me. Patrick Mahomes didn't have a great performance where? I thought he was really good in the Super Bowl last year. Maybe against the 49ers in 2019, he wasn't great, but they still got that win. Made the plays when they really needed to be made for the Chiefs. Pete thinks the Steve Wilks hire is underrated. Could push the 49ers defense step further. A stranglehold on that number 1 spot. Because if you look at the 49ers DVOA, look, again, we could why don't we filter this by week? Why don't we go to the post Christian McCaffrey acquisition? So I'm going to select everything from week 8 onward. That's when McCaffrey assumed his full-time role at SoFi against the Rams. So look at the 49ers. Number 1 by 13 points, 47.1% over average. Kansas City was at 34.8%. Number 2 offense, number 1 pass offense, number 6 rush offense, number 1 defense, number 4 pass defense, number 5 run defense, number 5 special teams. I'm highlighting right here, I'm circling number 1 defense. Steve Wilks could give the 49ers another dimension defensively. They were already the best defense last year, but what if they morph into an even better unit in 2023 with Steve Wilks focusing on that secondary? He obviously has Javon Hargrave now, which is really big. They've lost some edge rushers, but those weren't A-list edge rushers. It was Charles Omenihu, Jordan Willis, Sansom Ebukam. Those are guys that, you hope that your second-round draft pick, Drake Jackson, can help pick up the slack. You hope that one of your signings like Cleveland Farrell can pick up the slack. Maybe they even sign another edge rusher moving forward. It's all unclear right now, but we do know the 49ers have Hargrave this year. They didn't last year. They were already the number 1 defense last season, and we'll see what Steve Wilks can do working with that unit. Eric Gomes like Wilks' temperament. More discussion of Wilks' play calling aside from more blitzing. Well, he's going to be more multiple with the coverages on the back end. This is a guy with a DB background, and the 49ers, early in this regime's tenure with Robert Saleh, they ran almost exclusively cover 3, right? That's the Seattle-style zone that Richard Sherman made famous under Pete Carroll. The 49ers generally evolved out of cover 3 or majority cover 3 into a hybrid of man and zone defense. And I think that you're only going to get more exotic and more multiple on the back end with Steve Wilks now as your DB coach. He believes in the front 4. He believes that everything starts up front. That's great. But the combinations of what he runs behind the front 4 to try to tie in with the pass rush in that defensive backfield are going to be more multiple than ever. That's what I would expect out of Steve Wilks. I don't know the status of Jason Verrett. I wouldn't be surprised if he retired because we haven't heard or gotten any news that he's been working out or trying to make a comeback. But I don't know. I'll just put my hands up on that one. It's good. The difficulty of the Niners schedule is always a factor. They're a West Coast team, right? And if you're a first place team, well, then you generally play other first place teams. And if you're a West Coast team, you travel a lot. This year, the 49ers have 30,000 flight miles, at least. Might be even a little bit more. But it takes only about 29,000 miles to circumnavigate the globe. So the 49ers are flying a lot. They play some tough teams this year. They don't really have a setup for a good East Coast stay to minimize some of the flying. There's one in between Cincinnati and Minnesota, but it's a long week because of a Monday night game at Minnesota. It's going to be tough for the 49ers this year, travel-wise, schedule-wise. It's always a factor, though. It's never easy, it seems, for these West Coast teams, especially first-place finishers. I do think that Jair Brown was a good draft pick, but I'll see if I'm right. I mean, that's just my personal opinion. He's going to have to show up and deliver at the NFL level. Several picks in OTAs, that's good. Allows the 49ers to be more confident with some 3 safety sets to allow Jair Brown into the mix to start 2023. You want me to go to Oakdale, California, do a 49ers video there? There's a whole bar in Oakdale that's 49ers fans. All right. Oakdale, California it is. I got to find it. We'll do a show from Oakdale. Let me know the name of the bar, and maybe I could swing by. Oakdale, that's in Gold Country, right? That's not too far from Modesto, I believe. 209 area code. Think that I'm right. Dates for training camp. Hope all is well with you as well, Jason. July 18th, rookies report. That's 9 days away. July 25th, about 2 weeks away. So tomorrow is going to be 15 days. Veterans report. First practice should be on July 26th. Eric Gomes verifies that Oakdale is a cool city. I think it's in the 209, or is Oakdale 916 already? I think it's 209. Zay is near the 209. I get it. Mike welcomes Jason back to the show. Well, Brock Purdy's not undefeated as a starter. They lost to Philadelphia, but he did get hurt really early in that game. So he's not undefeated. There's one loss, but there's an asterisk by that loss. Brock Purdy has never lost a game which he has finished healthy. We'll put it that way. Even won a game where he wasn't healthy. the Seattle game with that oblique injury. Will the 49ers beat the Giants on Thursday night? Well, they'll be at home. I'll tell you that much. Cool. All right. That's my little handicapping of the NFC. I think the 49ers have the best roster there, but it's going to come down to the quarterback position. So again, we shine the light on Brock Purdy, Trey Lance, and Sam Darnold. Can also shine the light on the other QBs and the NFC. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's get this week started off right tomorrow. Everybody have a great Sunday evening, and we'll talk to you on Monday. Take care now.